Welcome to part two of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. We're continuing the conversation with Dr. Mulyadi Robin of the Australian Institute of Business. We're just going to move a little bit further, looking at TEXA. TEXA is known to govern how we do things or regulates everything, all things assessments with higher ed. Are there any new changes that you are aware of, and which you think higher ed should be taken into consideration given the current times, and should be applied?
Sure. I think one of the things that is exciting, and we're watching with close eyes, keen eyes really, is this idea that we're making it illegal for contract cheating providers to actually exist, right, and provide those services. I think that issues around academic integrity is really something that would be really important. And part of that, thinking about what the 2020 has brought is a high level of uncertainty, whether it's for undergrad students, postgrad students, because your futures are uncertain. Young individuals are losing sort of their jobs and are worried about whether they can make rent and stuff like that. And we know from research that when students are worried, or when students are pressurized into getting high results or being able to put together an assessment, they fall under high risk category, right, whereby they'll end up doing things like engaging in academic integrity misconduct to actually be able to pass their assessments. And I think one of the things that we should be really looking at is this idea of how do we promote a culture of academic integrity. I know the conversation isn't quite new, but I believe that there is going to be, and I hope that there is going to be, a renewed focus on this area of things from TEXA, as well as from the institutions, our peer institutions, who we're really fortunate to be working with in Australia. So yeah,
good. Looking forward, I know you've mentioned a little bit about creating a culture where students are more academic integrity focused, and focusing on that level of, I'm not going to cheat in this exam, I'm just going to be authentic in my studies. And I know you've done some research around the key drivers for success for international students. So the question here will be around, what would you say are the key success among the drivers for success for students in the international space, and how might institutions take that into consideration in improving enrollment and engaging students in study?
Sure. Yeah. This is part of my research that we haven't quite published it, apart from a conference proceeding that we did. What I found was really interesting. So I surveyed about 300 international students across a couple of semesters. So basically, from the start of their studies, in the middle towards the end of the semester, and then we repeated that, and we had a full set of about 300 students, international students, who did this study. And what I found is it's not so much of the acculturation that we're expecting. A lot of international students, like myself, have come, when I first came, I came to Australia, and we're expected really to conform, to learn about the Australian culture, to mingle with them, and then that would hopefully give us the lens of success. What I did was I was looking at the expatriate literature, which is kind of unique and interesting, and also reflecting on my own development and journey. And it wasn't so much about what I've learned about Australia, although I do speak with an Australian accent now, which is kind of interesting in its own. It's a different story. But it's actually the friends that I had of people who are of similar background as I am, right? So people, I'm Indonesian, but I grew up in Singapore, spent a majority of my time there. And it was people from the South Asian region, my connections with them. That was what really provided the pillars of support for me with. And this particular piece of research across the term actually discovered that. And initially it was kind of surprising, because, does this mean that our efforts in integrating international students into Australian society, are they really to waste? But I think it's not that. I think that's as important. But more importantly, is this element that students, when they find people who are alike, who share the same cultural background, similar interests, and similar journeys. Now, again, a lot of students come to Australia, a lot of international students come to Australia thinking about completing a degree and then moving back to a different country, or some of them might want to stay. And just like the expatriate literature suggests, if you look at the literature around expats, expat communities are actually what is important in ensuring that these individuals can, sort of settle into that new host country, if you'd like, and actually be able to work within them. And I think for international students, that was a key part, a key driver. Now, unfortunately, that study, we had to stop it due to COVID-19. But what will be interesting, I think, is looking at the current students who are stuck here, right, who aren't able to go back or even aren't able to really find a home with individuals who are like-minded, and what types of support structures might institutions be actually able to provide for them. That would be interesting. At AIB, we don't have a lot of international students. I mean, we've got the majority of our students are Australian, or we've got a growing sort of cohort of students in Canada. We don't really take in international students per se, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in other institutions where there are a number of international students who've engaged with them there.
I'm actually excited to read that research because, the idea of the expat communities would be crucial to help institutions understand how to do things better. And looking forward to that. With the knowledge that we need to do things better as a country and in our institutions to accommodate international students, is also the need for, there is an argument around formative and summative assessments. While there are schools of thought that promote actually promote the need for more formative assessment as opposed to summative assessment, I know that there are challenges around these. So let's explore formative and summative assessments. What are the known challenges in design and administration?
Sure. Yeah, I always jokingly, in a way, always question those people who say, "Oh, formative assessments are great." I go, "Have you tried this with your students?" Because the majority of formative assessment, as the term suggests, we don't attach marks to it, and trying to get students to engage with them can be very difficult. What we found at AIB, really interestingly, is that as we move towards this practical business school approach, so for instance, with leadership, which is the first subject that all of our MBA students go through, and one that I teach into, is that our formative assessment are tailored towards professional and personal development. So what we found is that when students are able to get something, really, it's not just about a learning journey that you're ticking a box, but when they're able to get something for themselves as an individual, that we found really, really helpful in terms of engaging students with formative assessment. The other challenging aspect of formative assessments is, balancing that juggling act of how many assessments is too many, and how, what is too little, and balancing that with trying to ensure that you get students to conduct, and participate within the formative assessments as well as complete the summative assessments. Because, I'm studying at the moment. I do it for fun, and I'm, studying coding, and the formative assessments are really good, right? Because that's what gets you there. But really, at the end of the day, because I'm paying for, to study, and I know that I'm graded ultimately on the summative assessment, even as a student, I tend to focus on formative assessments that are actually going to be useful for my summative assessment. So I think part of ways that we can overcome this challenge is to actually scaffold the formative assessments to the summative assessment, in that if you do the formative assessment, it would really help you complete your summative assessment, but it won't penalize you if you don't do the formative assessments, because sometimes I think you got to keep that distinctions clear. Or some of my colleagues have actually done the opposite, in terms of they go, right, these are formative assessments, but we're going to attach marks to them. And that creates in itself a back end, an unintended outcome, in that sometimes you end up overinflating the grades because it's not necessarily measuring the learning outcomes that we want to see.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest theories, or my biggest lessons I've learned over the years as a learning designer, has always been assessments should assess the learning outcomes. It's not just about creating an assessment because it's fun and it's rich, but it should be assessing the learning outcome. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you so much, Mulyadi, for your time today and sharing your wealth of knowledge. Looking forward to your research paper, and I'm just curious to learn more about the expat communities and all your other work around servant leadership. Thank you again, and looking forward to other collaborations with you.
Yeah, not a problem at all. Thank you so much for having me.